As you know, if you take the brain out of a dead person who just died, you take it out and you can put it in the palm of your hand. It's about 2 to 3 pounds. It's like a jello. It quivers. It's like having jello in your hand. And it's very slippery. And it is made up of about 100 billion neurons, cells, individual cells. If you want to get an idea how big that number is, let me give you an idea. It's beyond comprehension. If you were to start counting that number and it took 1 second to count each number, actually you can count about 3 in 1 second. 1 second is a very long time. But if you were to say 1, 2, 3 each second, it will take about, anybody wants to take a guess how long it will take to count that number? Just take a wild guess. It's fun. We're making this talk a fun. I want to make it fun.
15 years.
Any other guesses? Okay. Anyone else who wants to venture? It will take about 250,000 years to finish counting. But let me tell you something more surprising. Each single one of these neurons has as many connections as 10,000 connections with axons. These are the extension of neurons. This is how they communicate with one another. Actually, I apologize. I made a mistake. I just calculated on the calculator. We are talking about 250 million years, not 250,000 years. But let's say we also want to count the connections that they made. So take that 100 billion and multiply by 10,000, because each neuron has 10,000 connections. That number comes to a quadrillion, which is 10 to the power 18th. Now I want you to take a guess that if you were to start counting that number, how long it will take you to count that number. Now you are thinking it must be a very large number because we are talking about that. If you were born at the same time when the universe was created 13.72 billion years ago, you will be still counting. So what does that really tell you? It tells you that brain is some kind of amazing organ. It is probably the greatest miracle of nature. And one of those things that are the most ununderstood phenomenon in nature. At this point in history, in 2010, the greatest challenge is not understanding gravity or time or how big is the universe. Those are big challenges. How did the life begin? Those are huge challenges. But probably the number one on the list is to understand the human brain. Here is a reason why, if you think about it. Who figured out how old is the universe? It's this one, right? So the very source that gives you all these answers, to understand that source is the biggest challenge. Now for our discussion, we are going to discuss only that aspects of brain that concerns us, concerns our seminar. We are not going to get into the whole brain because that is 10 years of research and academic studies, and still at the end of 10 years you are like completely puzzled. So nobody is going to be able to discuss all that. So we are going to try to focus on only those aspects of brain that actually concern us, that serve our purpose. We're being a little bit selfish here and just focus on those things that give us idea how the mind and the brain are connected, or are they connected at all? Maybe they are not. So I'm going to give a very simplistic picture of the anatomy and the physiology of the brain, somewhat oversimplified, but that gives the message. Basically, brain, as I said, about 3-pound organ inside the skull, and it extends into the entire body. It sends its connections, wires, little cables to your fingertips, to your toes, to every single cell in the body, which is about 100 trillion cells, are innervated. So get messages from the brain, and every single cell in the body takes messages from the environment, the cues, whether it's your vision or what you hear or what you taste or you touch. It sends messages to the brain. Brain makes the decisions what to do with those messages, and then sends decisions back to your limbs and your organs, whether they are internal visceral organs or they are external organs. It sends messages back and tell them what to do. That is a 1-minute summary of how the brain works. Now, it is true that it's very possible 50 years from now we may have a super quantum computer which can be as smart as the human brain and literally talk to you like a consciousness is talking to you. But still, we're going to have one dilemma, because without the brain being connected to the rest of the body, it still doesn't tell us how the brain works, because brain does not work without having its extensions to the rest of the body. The brain in itself will be kind of meaningless if you think about it. We generally think of brain like a brain and forget about the rest. So brain is a 3-pound mass, and right underneath it is an organ called brainstem. And then brainstem, it doesn't end there. It continues into a long tail. It's called spinal cord. It's a continuation of the brain. And it goes through a long hole which runs through your vertebral column. So these bones that are stacked on each other, each bone has a hole towards the posterior backside, and the holes are stacked up on each other. Therefore, it makes a long tunnel, and that brain stem extends into the spine and goes through all the way down to the crevice here. And at each level, that brain stem and downwards, the spine will send extensions, nerves outside, and then those nerves will divide and divide further like branches of the tree and end up innervating every part of your body. Now, there are two pathways. One is the sensory pathways. Sensory pathways are cables, nerves, bringing information from your environment, bringing the input into your brain. And then there are second pathways which are called motor nerves, which originate from the brain and extend outwards. So it's a two-way highway. So you can go this way, there's a yellow line in the middle, and you can go the other way. And it is necessary for the body to function, right? It's simple to understand. So when you see something, the message is going to the brain, and the brain has to decide what to do with that image, how to respond. If you hear something, which is called auditory, goes through the auditory nerve. Or if you taste something, it's called gustatory. If you smell something, it's called olfactory nerves. Olfactory nerve is the only one actually that goes directly into the brain. That's the only exception. Everything else goes through the brainstem, or the rest of the body bring messages through the spine into the brainstem and up into the brain. Is fair enough? Very easy to understand? Now, brain has evolved over millions of years from inward out. We have a system called the primitive brain. Some people like to call it the reptilian brain. It makes them feel good because it's very similar to the reptiles, which we had millions of years ago. And then slowly what happened is after the dinosaurs died and mammals evolved, it started to build in evolution cortex over it. Cortex is the thinking part of the brain. So as you see, look at older mammals, they have a little bit of cortex. You see the later mammals such as chimpanzees and baboons and all those monkeys who are smarter than other animals. They have more of a cortex. In humans, it's the biggest size cortex. Now, size is not necessarily always associated with smartness, but in mammals it's pretty much true. The bigger the size of the brain, the smarter the species is. There are certain parts in the brain that are unique only to humans. No other species have it. And they are really, you can count on your fingers. Those are called, there is an inferior parietal lobule. And actually the names tell you what we are talking. Inferior means underneath. Parietal means parietal lobes. Lobule means small lobe. And it has two parts. It has angular gyrus and supramarginal gyrus. That one and another area called Wernicke area. Wernicke area in the brain is an area where you understand when someone is talking, you comprehend that speech. It's a comprehension area. These names are not important. What is important for you to know is that there are certain things in human brain which are unique only to humans. You do not find in any other species. So here is the catch. I'm going to tell you, discuss very briefly only that section of the brain which is relevant to our discussion for future seminars. How our behavior, our mind is connected to the brain and how they interact. What has happened over millions of years is that species had only the primitive brain, what is called also the limbic system, which is also called the emotional brain. And that makes sense. If you look at animals, what is important? Only a few things: eating, sleeping, and reproducing, and safety. And also that your body continue to breathe, you have homeostasis, your temperature is maintained, so your lungs and heart is working spontaneously without you having to think about it, and that's what makes up an animal, right? So this is the primitive brain that we all share, all species share, which is made out of primarily the brainstem and parts of the emotional brain, which is called the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. Again, names are not important. What is important to know is that all animals, including humans, if you want to call them animals, share that brain, which is important for survival. And what do I mean by survival? If you see danger in the environment, you should be able to immediately detect it. That is what this part of the brain does, that it very quickly, emotionally reacts to the environment and either run for safety or get ready to fight. This is what animals do. Either they are predators or they are prey, or they have to run for a hide. Brainstem take care of the autonomic function system, which primarily means that your heart is beating without you having to think about it, that your breathing is going on. You don't make an effort to breathe, it just happens. Your temperature is maintained. Your coordination is brain, you don't think about it. The cerebellum is taking care of it. But this is the interesting part. You will see how humans became different from animals. As over millions of years, that primitive brain started to accumulate gray matter on top, which is called the cerebral cortex. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger over approximately 60 million years. And what happened when that, you see in evolution that as messages from outside the environment come into the thalamus, thalamus is part of the primitive brain, it used to always send those messages to amygdala. Amygdala is emotional part of the brain. It makes emotional decisions. It deals with your emotional intelligence. It decides what to do with that information. And it's very reactive.